hi to all who are listening. Welcome to the Theology Mill podcast brought to you by Whitfenstock Publishers. My name is Zach Mickle. I'm on the staff here at Whitfenstock. I'm also the host of this podcast, which consists of interviews with leading authors and thinkers in theology, biblical studies, and philosophy. If you like what you're hearing on this podcast, please come stop by our website at whitfenstock.com, where you can browse our catalog of publications and also read our blog. So this episode is part one of our Bulgakov Booth, in which we'll be learning about Sergius Bulgakov, the Russian Orthodox priest, theologian, and economist. These interviews will explore the many intellectual turns in Bulgakov's biography, as well as some of the key themes in his writings. So in this inaugural episode, I had the opportunity to sit down with Dr. Regula Zwahlen. And Dr. Zwahlen is the scientific director of the Sergiy Bulgakov Research Center at the University of Fribourg, as well as the co-editor of the German edition of Bulgakov's work. So with that, I just want to say how much we at Whitfenstock appreciate you listening, and we hope you enjoy this conversation. Okay, so I am here with Dr. Regula Zwahlen, who is the scientific director of the Sergiy Bulgakov Research Center at the University of Fribourg, which is in Switzerland. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so let's so one question we're starting to use as an icebreaker that I've been tinkering with on the show is talking about kind of three thinkers in a room. And since we're going to be talking about Bulgakov, which actually let's just establish something really fast, because I've heard different pronunciations of Bulgakov, Bulgakov. I've heard a few different pronunciations, and also I see that his first name sometimes is spelled Sergius, sometimes Sergej. So could you help me understand how to say this man's name?
So it's Bulgakov.
Okay.
Not Bulgakov or something, it's Bulgakov.
Okay.
And with the forenames, it's just his first forename was Sergei. Okay. That's the normal name. And when he became a priest in 1918, he was given the Orthodox name of Sergii. In Russian, it's called Sergei, and often in English translations, and he himself, he used the name Sergius, so the Latin form of this. So not everybody agrees if we should say Sergei or Sergius.
Sure. Well, yeah, I'm glad that we could establish how you pronounce his name. So thank you for helping with that. I do see sometimes that even in books that have been published in English translation, that sometimes his author name is listed as Sergius and sometimes as Sergej or some variation. So it's good to know some of the history behind that. But so to get to this icebreaker question I was talking about, since we're dealing with Bulgakov, if you had to stick Bulgakov, or if you had the opportunity to stick Bulgakov in a room with three other thinkers sort of around a table and you got to listen in to their conversation, which thinkers would you choose and why?
Yes. Okay. Can I say you gave me that question before, so I already thought about it a little.
Yes, of course.
The first person that came to my mind was Immanuel Kant. Because I think he's one of the most important thinkers Bulgakov dealt with, and he's always somehow somewhere between the lines in Bulgakov's Anthropology. Mainly because of his theory of the person or the human being as end in itself, and which should not be instrumental. And Bulgakov always said that's kind of a secular form of saying each human being is an image of God.
Mm.
And yeah, of course, he has a lot of criticism for Kant, so as well. So I would really like to hear them discuss that in person. Then the next person or philosopher or thinker I thought of was Hannah Arendt.
Okay.
Because of her political thought, social thought, her critique of totalitarianism. She repeated. No, she did not repeat, but some of her ideas. You could already read them in Russian philosophers who criticized Marxism and in the totalitarian aspects of Marxism. And that's one thing. And another thing I think I already wrote about it several times, but there's one thing Hannah Arendt wrote in her little book about existentialism. And I have that phrase with me. So what she said is, the very point in which all of modern philosophy can take no comfort whatsoever is that man is forced to affirm a being that he did not create and that is alien to his very nature. So that's what she said modern philosophy is about. And I think one of the main things Bulgakov's theology is about is that being we did not create is not something alien to our beings, but it's a gift and it belongs to us, and we have to do something with it and know it.
Sure, yeah.
I think that's something these two people should talk about. And the third person that came to my mind was the German Protestant theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer. With his thoughts about the role of religion and the church in modern society, with his thoughts of resistance against injustice and also totalitarianism, and his thoughts about God in his world, that God is not something very far away from us, but something that, or the Christianity is something that should help us live in the world and not think about something heaven all the time, or something that is far from us. So I think these 4 people in one room, that would be quite exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's fun to think about, what those 3 thinkers besides Bulgakov might get into as well. Like I think it'd be really interesting to hear Hannah Arendt and Dietrich Bonhoeffer talk, especially because they were so closely involved with with World War II and the Holocaust and everything. It'd be really, really, I think, really fascinating to hear them speak about that together. Okay, so for those who don't know Bulgakov's work or don't know much about him, could you just say a little bit about who he was, what kind of was the context he lived in, or what were some of the major events of his life?
Yeah. So Bulgakov was born in 1871 in the Russian Empire, and there was a very interesting time for the Russian Empire because 10 years ago there was a huge reform, the liberation of the slaves, or abolition of serfdom, and everything was changing. There was a lot of unrest in the society, and something was going on, and he was one of these young people who wanted to change society. They wanted to change it for the better and do something about it, to engage politically, was still very difficult in that time, but something was going on in this society. So it's a very interesting time he lived in. And he grew up in a very little provincial town in Western Russia. He was a son of a cemetery priest.
Mm.
He was himself supposed to become a priest as a young boy. He went to these schools who prepared him. Should prepare him for that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, already as a teenager, he had some kind of crisis, faith crisis. He thought his teachers could not answer his questions.
Mm.
And he decided to change to a secular school, to a secular high school. And obviously he could do that, and his parents were okay with that. So that was a major step in his life, away from what he should have become then, to a secular education. And then he went to University of Moscow. Actually, he wanted to. He writes in his autobiography that he wanted to study philosophy or literature or something, but because he really wanted to change something in society, he enrolled for in the law faculty and economics, and that was considered the so-called progressive or liberal faculty at this university. Everybody who wanted to do something, he went there. All the Marxists, of course. So the modern kind of economy at that time was the Marxist thing. And one of his students, his colleagues, was Vasily Kandinsky, the painter, for example. It must have been very interesting to study then at the Moscow University.
Absolutely.
And well, he made a career. He studied economics. He was gifted, and he was promoted to go further to write a dissertation. So he wrote a dissertation, and he went abroad to write this dissertation. It's about agrarian industry or the agrarian question, how to change the reform. So it's called about the markets in capitalist production, and of course it was a Marxist-minded thesis. And he traveled for it a lot to Germany. He met many important people of social democracy in Germany. But that's when he got disappointed in Marxism. While during his thesis, he thought that the Marxist way of not market, but the Marxist way of doing economics will not work for farmers in Russia. So that's where he disagreed with Lenin, and so that's the one thing. And the other thing is, while he thought he would like to combine Marx with Kant, because he thought that the dignity of every individual human being must be justified in economics as well, and he thought that Marxism does not provide that. So in this time there were a lot of changes in his thoughts, and he went further and further away from Marxism because of that. And well, with his religious background, I think religious questions came back in, and in the Russian intelligentsia, so the educated people were very interested in religious questions in that time. It was kind of a religious revival, and he was affected by that as well, and started to ask questions. He read Dostoevsky. Everybody was talking about Lev Tolstoy and his critique of the church. And of course, he got to know Vladimir Solovyov, the great Russian philosopher, and read him and was very impressed by him. And so that's his way back to religious questions. So he was part of a very creative society, educated society in Moscow and St. Petersburg after that. And he became a professor first in Kiev, and then he changed to Moscow after the first Russian Revolution, 1905. He decided he had to engage with politics because it was possible now. So the Tsar allowed to establish a Duma, a parliament, and he somehow wanted to be part of that. And he was part of that. He was part of the second Duma. He was elected as a Christian socialist.
Okay.
What he did is he began to develop Christian socialism, not an atheist one like Marx and Lenin did. So that's one background, and now it goes on with the revolutionary developments until 1917. After that, he was expelled from the Soviet Union, and he came to Paris, where they established the Theological Institute in order to preserve Orthodox theology. And in the time of revolution, around 1917, 1918, he decided to become a priest. And he decided so because during 1917, there was the provisional government, and they separated the ties between church and state. And that was the reason why Bulgakov said, now I can become a priest because the church is now a free institution and not dependent on the state anymore. So now I can do this. Earlier he could not.
Sure. Okay.
In his life, there is a death of a son. His marriage, of course. He had 4 children. Well, there's a lot to say, but I hope I'm the important ones.
His son was quite young when he passed. Is that right?
Yeah, he was 9 years old.
9 years old. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, thank you for that. That's very, very helpful context. What would you say? I mean, I know with a figure like Bulgakov especially, this is a really tricky and difficult question, but what would you say are some of the major threads of his work throughout his career?
Maybe if, like many English readers, American readers, who only know the late theological work, maybe they would not say the same things as I, where I started to read the early works. And I think 3 threads in his work are, well, the dignity of the human person. That's something he writes about from the start, even as a Marxist. And the meaning of matter. So that was something that was very influential in his interest in Marxism, because he thought one thing that is really right about Marxism, or even materialism more broadly, is that matter matters. So we live in this material world, and we have to deal with it, and it's a part of us. We have bodies. We are material beings, and that's something Marx got right. It's playing a role in history, but he wanted to find a religious, a Christian explanation for this act.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
So persons, matter, and history. So the meaning of history is a very important thread in Bulgakov's thought, and it's interesting that his last book he ever wrote is about the Apocalypse of John, which he says that's kind of a theology of history, or an interpretation of the whole human history and what's it about and where's it heading.
Sure. Yeah, no, thank you for that. And you had kind of alluded to this already, that he was sort of part of a class of thinkers that's often associated with what's called the Russian Silver Age or the Russian Religious Renaissance. So I think you mentioned Soloviev, is that how you say his name?
Yeah.
You mentioned him, Soloviev. You mentioned him already. So I know he was kind of one of the thinkers associated with this movement, but who were some of these other thinkers, and then what was Bulgakov's relationship like with them and with their work?
Yeah, so the one group are the artists and poets and writers, and then you have many philosophers, and there are not so many people, and they meet in Moscow and St. Petersburg at several groups and meetings. They are not so many, so they all knew each other.
Sure.
And wrote in the same journals and so on. And they are founding all these religious philosophical societies in every major town, where they would have discussions about the relationship of religion and philosophy, the church and philosophy. And one of the major, most influential persons was Dmitry Merezhkovsky and his wife Zinaida Gipius. They are connected with this new religious consciousness. They were totally anti-church. They thought they developed a thought outside the church. And well, you have to develop a new kind of religious thinking or religious life individually or in groups, but not with the institution of the historical church.
Sure.
And Bulgakov was not very fond of them. He did not agree. Sometime he mocked Merezhkovsky as the new Martin Luther of Russia. Yeah, so Bulgakov was one of the people who wanted to reform the church. So they wanted to have change within the church and to reform the church and to stop with that state-church relation as it was in the Russian Empire. So this church was kind of a state ministry to control people, and they thought church has another role in society, not to control people. And one of these people was Novosielov. I don't know the forename anymore. He was very influential, but also very conservative. So Bulgakov was always floating between very different points of views, trying to find his own position. And one of his closest colleagues was Nikolai Berdyaev, who was very, very influential with his philosophical academy, different initiatives. They worked together as editors of a journal. Yeah, but they had quite a difficult relationship, but they were very close.
Yeah.
And both were very influential in their own ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know that you actually wrote a book on Berdyaev and Bulgakov and their relationship, right? Isn't that correct?
Yeah.
And you've written a lot outside of the book, even on their relationship. So could you say a little bit more about their relationship specifically? So, and you mentioned that there were some differences, there were some difficulties in the relationship, but just based on reading some of your work, I know there were also some similarities. So could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah.
I know that opens up a whole can of worms, so you don't feel like you have to
I
answer
wrote a whole book
all of
about
it.
that.
Yeah, go read the
Well,
book. That's what you can
it
answer.
was my thesis.
Okay.
It's written in German, so it's a little bit difficult.
Sure.
Yeah. So what combines them or puts them together is their endeavor to develop a kind of Christian socialism. They both were former Marxists. They thought Marx had some points with regard to social justice, how a society should be organized. But they wanted to justify that in a Christian way and not in an atheist way. So that's the main point of connection between the two: the defense of human dignity and the defense of freedom of every single person, and the search for a kind of society that makes the human dignity possible, but not in a atomistic or individualist way. So we still would have kind of connections between people, or a just social society. But they were always on the search for something like this, and they actually thought and said a lot that the ideals of the French Revolution, so liberty, equality, fraternity, were actually Christian values, and they should be justified in a Christian way and not in an atheist way. So that was their main goal that they wanted to achieve. And so they both developed their religious thought. And Bulgakov was always more, the church guy, and more the one who wanted to do this within a Reformed Orthodox Church. And Berdyaev is someone who was Orthodox. He said he's Orthodox, but he's not so much someone who is linked to the church life.
Sure.
And very, very generally speaking, Berdyaev is always a very romantic thinker. He is always searching for unity, identity. He always wants to see the divine in people, to merge the divine and the human. And Bulgakov is someone who looks for synergy. So if you want an opposite, it's identity in Berdyaev and synergy in Bulgakov, who always wants to keep the human dignity as something separate, but always in dialogue or in cooperation with the divine. Sure. But he says human being are made as partners, or someone who God wants to talk to, but not wants to be that everybody is the same.
Sure.
God creates plurality of persons.
Okay. That's very interesting, very helpful.
Sorry, very different view
go
of the notion of freedom. So that is something where they are really different thinkers. For Berdyaev, you could say he is always almost a agnostic thinker. So freedom is a principle apart from God. It's something outside of God that God cannot control. And Bulgakov would rather say freedom is a gift from God. It's something given to people. It's connected to our relationship to God, but it's not something outside of God. So very simply spoken.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like in some ways they're both very philosophical thinkers, but Bulgakov is maybe a little more theological leaning, and Berdyaev is maybe a little more philosophical leaning. You've brought up a few times how important, like, the dignity of the human person, the importance of just kind of laying out a theory of human personhood is for Bulgakov. And I know he uses a handful of terms in doing this, including like two that I've written down here are Godmanhood and Sophia. So what? Maybe you could speak to these two specifically, or if you have others in mind. What do these have to do with kind of the constitution of the human person in his mind?
Yes.
Another difficult question, I know.
Yeah. So sophiology is the difficult notion here. But I think one has to understand and to know that sophiology for Bulgakov, that's anthropology. In the first place, it's something he needs to explain his own anthropology. And it's about the divine human nature of each human person he's speaking about. So actually, Godmanhood, so refers to the Chalcedonian Creed, to the definition of Christ, in whom divine nature and human nature are combined. And that's the main question for Bulgakov. How is that possible, that God can become human? How is this connected? And one of the answers is man is already made in the image of God, and that's kind of a divine human structure of personhood.
Got it. Okay.
Which is already there, and because of that, God can become human. And so that's quite important for Bulgakov, that human nature is not something alien to us or to persons that we have to fight or be against, or but nature is given, and we cannot get rid of it, and we should not, because it's something good.
Sure.
It's created. And so in later modern Orthodox thinking, there is a lot of talk about person versus nature, and that's something very alien to Bulgakov. You will not find it in him. He thinks a person is always made of the personality, the I in the person, which develops itself in her nature and even her individuality. And nature is, and the human nature is also kind of related and part of whole nature of the whole creation.
Sure. Okay.
So that's very important. And here is that's where Sophia comes in. At another place, actually, it's called a book called The Tragedy of Philosophy. Bulgakov wrote in the 1920s. That's very interesting, because there he talks of the philosophy of hypostasicity. So his concept of personhood is a philosophy or a theology of hypostasicity, because in the patristic texts, the human God is conceptualized as Trinity in her own nature. So you have three hypostases in one nature, ousia. And in Bulgakov's concept, then human hypostases are made in the image of God, so they are made in the image of Trinity. And then you have all human hypostases sharing one nature, that is our world, the creation.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, it's really a bit difficult to explain.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And Sophia is an aspect of divine nature and of and then created nature. So Sophia is what God reveals to us. He doesn't reveal everything of his own nature. Ousia, we don't know everything about God. But what he reveals to humanity is called divine Sophia. And what he does when he creates the world, he kind of copies that divine Sophia. He sets it free outside of himself. Creatio ex nihilo, that's how Bulgakov explains it. And then he creates men, and they should live in this revealed nature, like Trinity is living in her own nature and in communication with each other.
Sure.
Yeah.
It is quite complex. And I know that Bulgakov and I think others, from my understanding, are known for sort of elaborating on Sophia and developing this whole kind of Sophiology. So, is that original to Bulgakov? Or where is that sort of coming from? Because I know that it's popular, or at least my understanding is that it's sort of popular among Russian religious philosophers of that time period.
Yeah, that's actually a difficult question, because Sophia actually is an idea that came from Germany.
Okay.
So you find this concept of wisdom in Hildegard von Bingen, and then it was developed in German mystical thinkers, Jakob Böhme, Franz von Baader. And that's how it came to Russian intellectuals. And somehow they were the ones who developed this idea further. That's one explanation. The other explanation that Bulgakov uses a lot, because he wants to show that the idea of Sophia is something specially developed in Eastern Orthodoxy or Byzantine theology, is you have quite a lot of churches dedicated to Sophia, the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, and we have one in Kiev, in Novgorod. So it's quite a common concept. And of course, it also goes back to the Old Testament. But one can say it's always somehow connected with creation and nature. So that's one thing. It's always connected with art. So many artists in Russia referred to the concept, philosophers, and it's maybe really a speciality of Russian philosophy that they took this concept so seriously. But each one develops quite a different thing. So
Sure.
What Bulgakov then develops in his theology is very different from what Solovyov did and or Florensky did. They are, of course, influences, but in Bulgakov it takes off somehow in a very different direction. But it's always connected to the materiality and it's always connected to creation and human creativity. What to do with this world? How to create? How to develop economy?
Sure.
How to make art? So
So it's sort of if I'm hearing you correctly, it's sort of the creative aspect of how human beings can kind of cooperate with God's creative work. Is that right?
Yes, that
Yeah.
would be the goal, but he starts earlier. Just how that's a very Kantian question, by the way. How is creativity possible?
Sure. Yeah.
So Kant asked, how is knowledge possible? And Bulgakov's question from the beginning was, how is economy possible? How is creativity, production, consumption possible? And his sociology is one of the answers to that.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you've brought up Kant a few times, and I know that German idealism was really influential for Bulgakov. So could you say a bit about sort of how he's influenced by German idealism? Maybe, I mean, I know you've mentioned a bit about the Kantian influence, but I know he's influenced by like Schelling, for example. So what are who are sort of the particular thinkers that are especially influential for him? And then how does that influence sort of take shape in his own thinking?
Yeah, again, Kant is very important here, but I already mentioned that a lot of time. Then something that is actually quite new to me is the big importance of Fichte.
Okay.
In his strategy of philosophy, he deals a lot of Fichte and how he influenced his thought. So Fichte's concentration of the I, the human I, which you can't get rid of in thinking.
Sure.
And that's something Bulgakov says, yes, that's true. You can't get rid of it, and we have to somehow deal with it and to take it into a Christian anthropology. And yeah, Schelling, of course, is very important with his philosophy of nature again. So we're again with the aspect of nature, and we should take matter seriously as a given fact. And well, it's quite interesting. In his strategy of philosophy, he criticizes each of these German threads in German idealism because he thinks they are all one-sided. So he says they all just looked at one side of reality, because for him, reality is a Trinitarian being. It's always, being is always there in three aspects.
Okay.
Like in a sentence, you have a subject, you have an object, and you have being that relates.
Right.
I am something. And he says Kant and Fichte, they dealt with the I. He says Hegel, he dealt only with the object. And he says Schelling and Spinoza, they dealt only with being. And what we need in theology is all three of them in an anthropology of Trinitarian being. And so he takes something from everyone and he criticizes everyone to develop his own thinking.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a really helpful summation. Thank you for that. Well, you've spoken a bit to sort of his early Marxism and how he comes to sort of move beyond it. But could you maybe say a little bit about what ways his sort of early political and economic thinking get carried forward in his thinking sort of post-conversion? And then conversely, maybe in what ways did his conversion maybe create a rupture with those prior political and economic ways of thinking, if that did indeed kind of create a rupture for him?
Yeah. So Bulgakov himself, he always claimed there is absolutely no rupture in his development of thought. He said he always went from one step to another. And by dealing with the economy, he always asked the fundamental questions. So, as I already said, how is it even possible that human beings are able to create something, to do something with in this world? And so that's a philosophical question, and he always wanted economy to be aware of its philosophical preconditions. So it's not just economy or human history is not, like Marx said, just developing in a logical way, but humans are creating it, and it's important to know what values are behind it. So do we create or organize society in order to that just some people are going to be rich and exploit the others, or do we have an ideal of human dignity for everyone, so that we want to develop social justice? And so he always taught the history of social teachings, and he always wanted to see what did these people want and how did they develop, and that's how he thought that the religion behind all these social concepts or economic concepts is important, and it plays a role. It influences how people think and act, and that's how he thought we have to have a theology or a church that can support a society or an economy that fosters social justice and human dignity. And that's why he went into theology, in order to do something like that, or to develop something like that. And then he unfortunately had no time to go back into the political and economical hard work.
It seems like it seems like the groundwork he lays has a lot of generative possibility for sure, though, in the political realm. I know, so since he kind of started out as a socialist, seemingly sort of left the church, but from what I understand, claims he was always a Christian, or that his conversion was always ongoing. But he comes to eventually reject socialism, as you mentioned. So what's kind of the mature Bulgakov's critique of socialism? But then also, does he see like any redeeming qualities in socialism after he breaks with it?
Yeah, one could say he never really broke with it. Because he always wanted to foster social justice. But what he criticized was not socialism per se, but the atheist shape of it. So that they claimed that religion only puts people down, and is only saying that they will be redeemed when they are already dead. So they should just be patient and wait, and then everything will be fine. Bulgakov and also Berdyaev, they said, no, if you are a Christian, you have a duty to be active in society, to shape society in this direction, to enable social justice. You have to engage politically. So it's Bulgakov is always somewhere between liberalism and socialism. He always is looking for some reasonable way how to act here in our history. Without, always with these two things in mind: human dignity, individual human dignity, and social justice.
Sure.
And not to sacrifice humans for a better future. So that's important. So he criticized Lenin's approach to sacrifice the present generation for the promise that the future will be great.
Yeah. So he's never letting go of that importance of human dignity. Yeah. No. Yeah. For sure. Okay, so then what are sort of his views on the nation state? 'Cause I know you've written about this a bit, and sort of how the human person relates to the nation state. 'Cause I know at one point he talks about kind of a healthy national feeling, in his words, at least in English translation. So what does he mean by a healthy national feeling? But then the more broad question is sort of how does he think of the nation state?
Yeah, it's a bit a tricky question because he lived in the Russian Empire, and you had these national developments, and he developed his thought, and he changed his thought about this a lot. But the notion of a healthy national feeling he developed against the strong nationalism that was very strong in the Russian Empire before the revolution or between the revolutions. You had very nationalist people and politicians endorsed by the Orthodox Church who supported a very strong nationalism, and Bulgakov was quite against that. He thought a healthy national feeling is when you are you want your nation to prosper, to develop, but you don't have to put down other nations in order to do that.
Sure.
So he once criticized Solovyov's take on that. Solovyov said somewhere, you should love any nation like your own. So that kind of a Christian take, but Bulgakov said, well, it's a bit more complicated than that. So he related to the idea of one's mother. So you love your mother more than the mother of your friend, but that does not mean that you hate the mother of your friend. So
sure, yeah,
he thought it's a bit complex. You have a special relationship to your nation where you're born. That's just the way it is.
Sure.
But it does not mean that you should hate others.
Sure. Yeah. And I think in your answers already, you've kind of gestured towards Bulgakov's ideas of kind of how the church can, well, just what the church's role is in the political and economic spheres, but especially according to kind of him and his later thinking, what would you say is that role of the church for him? So, for instance, I'm thinking of an article you wrote called "The Revolutionary Spirit of Revelation," which is a really wonderful article. And you write, Bulgakov was deeply convinced that the rise of both Marxist communism and National Socialism was caused, among other factors, by the church's neglect of the social question. So essentially, like, the church sort of fails to offer an adequate social option, which is why people turn to these other options. So what's your understanding of sort of how, in Bulgakov's mind, the church has sort of neglected this social question, and then how might it attend to that question a little more faithfully?
Yeah, so that's again related to his context. So when he was a student and a young man, you had this very strong church-state relation in the Russian Empire. The church that controls people or is an instrument of controlling people for the state. So first of all, he thought the church must be free, and she must be free to criticize the state. And yeah, what he actually developed was a notion of a church where everybody is well acknowledged in his human dignity. You don't have to melt with everybody, so everybody has his talents to bring in and to communicate with others, to work with others, to cooperate. So if everybody brings in his talents, more will look out of it if you cooperate with others. And that's something the church should enable. But it should not do this only within itself. It should be open to society, and the church should give people the possibility to thrive and to go out into society and do their work in society. They should do politics. Church should not say which kind of politics they should do, but they should well, church should be a place where everybody can go and and be enhanced. Can you say that?
Yeah.
Church should show you what talents you have. You have to discover it in the church community, and you can go out into society and bring it into society, and also in economics, politics, and you can try to take your Christian values and try to put them into society somehow.
So
not force them on anybody.
Sure. That's it sounds like the singularity of sort of each person, the special gift. Say that again.
The word I was looking for was empowering. The church should empower.
Okay, good.
Their members to go out into society and do what they are talented to do.
No, I mean, I know that you're always working at the intersection of several different languages, so I can imagine it can be difficult calling up the right word. Well, I know it's past, it's like what, 7:40 in the evening on a Friday evening. So I want to let you go and respect your time. I'm very, very grateful. By the way, for our listeners, you should definitely go check out Regula's work. She's got a lot written in German, but also some written in English. So her book is in German. So if you read German, go buy it. I do not, but I visited her academia.edu page where you can find a lot of her work, and I read several of her articles in English, and I found them especially helpful if you're trying to sort of get a feel for the intellectual context that Bulgakov was working in and sort of how his thought relates to others. That sort of intellectual genealogy approach, I think, is kind of a trademark of your work from the sampling that I got. So I really, really appreciate that. So you all should go check her work out for sure. But Regula, I just want to say thank you again for taking the time to chat and on a late Friday evening. So,
well, thank you for having me.